In 2009, a 31-year-old school teacher in Phoenix named Marcus Rivera did something most of his friends thought was absolutely insane and completely reckless. He took $23,000, which was almost everything he had managed to save over 6 long years of teaching, and he used all of it to buy a small, beaten down duplex in a neighborhood where every third house on the street had a foreclosure sign sitting on the front lawn. His mother told him in no uncertain terms that he was throwing his money away, and his coworkers kept saying the economy was finished and would never recover. Cable news was running non-stop segments around the clock about the death of the American dream and the collapse of everything ordinary people had worked so hard to build. 14 years later, Marcus owns 11 rental properties, and his net worth crossed $2 million in 2023. And he still teaches, by the way, not because he has to, but simply because he wants to. And here is the thing that keeps me up at night thinking about what is possible for ordinary people who pay attention at the right moment. The pattern that created his wealth did not start with him, and it did not begin in 2009, because that same pattern has repeated almost identically at least 5 times in the last 100 years, and multiple indicators suggest it may be starting to happen again right now. So today, I want to walk you through exactly what that pattern looks like and why most people miss it every single time, and what ordinary people did to come out the other side as millionaires. To understand what happened to Marcus, you first need to understand a cycle that economists have been documenting and studying closely since the 1930s. It works like this, and it always begins the same way, every single time without fail. First, there is a period of excess where everything is booming and prices are rising and confidence is sky high, and everyone around you is convinced that the good times will never come to an end. Then comes the correction, when something breaks, and it could be a financial crisis or a pandemic or a technology shift or a major policy change. Prices fall dramatically, and fear takes over the entire market, and people panic and sell everything they own, and headlines turn completely apocalyptic. And right there in that window between the crash and the recovery is where the largest legal wealth transfers in history take place, every single time without exception. It happened after the crash of 1929, when families who bought farmland and blue-chip stocks at Depression-era prices built dynasties that still exist to this very day. It happened in the 1970s, when stagflation convinced most Americans that real estate was a losing bet right before the greatest property boom of the entire 20th century. It happened after the dot-com bust in the early 2000s, and it happened again during the chaos and uncertainty of 2020. But here is the part nobody ever talks about, because in every single one of those windows, the people who built the most wealth were not the ones who had the most money sitting in their accounts. They were the ones who recognized the pattern and had the awareness to act on it before it felt comfortable or obvious to everyone else around them. Let me take you back to Marcus for a second, because his story reveals something deeply counterintuitive about how real wealth gets built during these moments. Marcus did not have any inside information, and he did not have a finance degree or a Wall Street connection of any kind. What he had was a student's parent named Ray, who had been a property appraiser in Maricopa County for over 20 years and had seen the housing market crash and recover multiple times throughout his entire career. One afternoon at a parent-teacher conference, Marcus mentioned he had been thinking about buying a house, and Ray said something that would completely change the direction of his life. He said, "Do not buy a house to live in, and instead, buy the ugliest duplex you can find in a neighborhood where the rents are still getting paid, because prices are on the floor right now, and they will not stay there." That was the entire strategy, with no algorithm and no spreadsheet model, just a simple observation from someone who had watched prices crash and recover 3 separate times in his career. And Marcus listened, not because he felt brave or confident, but because Ray's logic was simple enough to trust. When prices fall below the actual cost of constructing brand new homes, they essentially have to come back up, because there is nowhere else for them to go over time. Within 3 years, that duplex had doubled in value, and the rent covered the mortgage payment from the very first day he owned it. Marcus used the cash flow from that first property to buy a second one, and then a third, and each one felt a little less scary than the one before it. Now, here is what I want you to notice about this story, because Marcus did not do anything complicated or risky in the way most people imagine. He did not time the exact bottom of the market, and he did not leverage himself to the breaking point. He just acted while everyone else was completely frozen in fear. And that brings us to the real question that matters more than any investment strategy or financial hack you'll ever hear. Why do most people freeze when the biggest opportunities of their lifetime are sitting right in front of them? There's a well-documented phenomenon in behavioral economics called loss aversion, and the short version is that losing $100 feels roughly twice as painful as gaining $100 feels good. Our brains are literally wired by evolution to overweight risk during downturns and to pull back from opportunity at the exact moment when opportunity is greatest. But it gets even worse, because during a crisis, you're not just fighting your own internal fear, you're also fighting the collective fear of everyone around you. Your family is worried, and the news is absolutely relentless, and social media is a highlight reel of worst-case scenarios playing on a constant loop in your mind. Every authority figure you can find, from economists to financial commentators to your own parents, is telling you to play it safe and wait things out. Think about what playing it safe actually meant back in 2009, because it meant keeping your money in a savings account earning a fraction of 1%, while the stock market was on sale at a nearly 60% discount from its peak. It meant continuing to rent instead of dying when home prices had fallen back to levels not seen in years across much of the country. Playing it safe was the single most expensive decision that millions of ordinary people made during that entire decade without even realizing it. This is the trap that catches smart people every single time, because safety feels responsible and caution feels mature and rational. But in these specific windows, during these brief, terrifying moments when everyone agrees the world is ending, caution is actually the riskiest move on the table. I'm not saying people should be reckless or throw money around without thinking, because that's not what this is about. I'm saying the definition of risk inverts during a crisis, and almost nobody adjusts their thinking to account for that fundamental shift. Let me give you a completely different example to show that this pattern is not limited to real estate or the stock market. In March 2001, a 26-year-old woman named Dana Park was working as a junior graphic designer at a dot-com startup in San Francisco, and the company folded, and she lost her job along with thousands of other talented people. She had about $8,000 to her name, and at least she could barely afford and no clear idea of what was going to happen next. But Dana noticed something important that most people around her were completely overlooking. All around her, talented designers and developers were getting laid off, and freelance rates had cratered, yet businesses still needed websites. They just could not afford agency prices anymore. So she started a small web design shop out of her apartment and hired 2 laid-off friends and charged half of what the surviving agencies charged because her overhead was practically nothing. By 2004, when the market recovered, Dana's firm had 40 clients and a real office and a reputation built during the years when nobody else was building anything. She sold that business in 2012 for a little over $4 million and completely changed the trajectory of her life. When people ask Dana about her success, she says something I think about constantly. She says, "I did not start a business during a downturn because I was brave. I started it because I was desperate, and the bravery came later when I realized it was working." That is a crucial insight, because most people who built lasting wealth during these windows did not feel courageous at all. They felt scared and uncertain, and they acted anyway, sometimes simply because they had no other choice. So let me talk about right now, because if this pattern is real, and a century of data strongly suggests it is, then the obvious question becomes, are we inside one of those windows today? I want to be careful here because I'm not a financial advisor and nothing in this video is financial advice, but I can point to signals that have historically preceded these windows. Certain asset prices have pulled back from their peaks, while the underlying demand has not disappeared, it has simply shifted. There's a generational technology transition underway, and every previous industrial revolution, from steam to electricity to computing to the internet, created a wave of new millionaires who were not part of the old guard. Public sentiment is heavily pessimistic, with consumer confidence surveys and investment flows suggesting that the average person is sitting on the sidelines. And historically, the sidelines have always been the most expensive seat in the house during these exact moments. Here's what I've taken away from studying these cycles for years. The window never looks like an opportunity when you're inside it, because it looks like chaos and bad news, and it feels like the worst possible time to take any risk. By the time it becomes obvious, by the time headlines shift from doom to boom, the biggest gains are already gone and captured by the people who moved earlier. The people who build wealth during these moments share a few simple traits that anyone can develop. They educate themselves before the window opens so they can move quickly when it does, and they start small without betting everything on one outcome. They focus on fundamental logic, asking whether this asset is below its long-term value and whether demand will return, and whether they can hold on if things take longer than expected. Those three questions are worth more than any stock tip or guru course or algorithm you will ever come across. And here's the part I really want you to hear, because you do not need to be rich to take advantage of these moments. Marcus had $23,000 and Dana had $8,000. And what they both had that most people lacked was awareness and willingness to act before it felt comfortable. I don't know what the next 12 months will bring, but I know this pattern has repeated too many times to dismiss. Educate yourself and start small and thinking years, not weeks. And whatever you do not let fear disguise itself as wisdom. If this video made you think differently about what might be coming next, subscribe to this channel because we break down the signals and stories behind the biggest wealth creation events in history, so that the next time a window opens, you won't just see it, you'll walk right through it. I'll see you in the next one.